Hi, my name is Karina Hernandez, and this is the first episode of What If, a podcast about wondering what would happen if certain sci-fi-ish events did happen. How would it affect our society and our everyday life? What would it take to make it real, and why is it so unrealistic? So, for today's episode, it is What If Teleportation Was Real, which is going all out science fiction, but let's have at it. So, the first thing we need to think about here is what comes with us. If it were to be an instantaneous, I'm standing in here and now I'm not, that would be completely unrealistic. I couldn't even put that into words because what comes with you? Where does it end? If we say, okay, what's touching our skin, then what about the sweatshirt you're wearing over your shirt? You'd have to make sure you touch that. And if just your hand is on it, does the whole sweatshirt come with you or just the part your hand is touching? Or what about if you're wearing shoes and you have socks with them, right? What about the shoes or the shoelaces? Your skin is touching the socks. So why would the shoelaces or the shoes come with? So that comes to our first thing that would really be necessary if we were to have this at all be somewhat realistic. They would need to be in cells or pods so that everything inside of it would go. Right? So it would be some kind of cylinder maybe. This is a very disgusting green color. The cylinder would have a door on it, which you would enter from, and it would vacuum seal. I will get to that why in a reason. What? I will get to that reason in a second. Oh my gosh. So there would have to be some kind of place to punch in a code to the other cell because there would be sending and receiving cells. They would do both. So you'd have to put in a specific code, and then depending on if the cell is locked or not, kind of how you lock your phone, then you would probably put in a password because if you have a cell or a pod in your home, you're not going to want people just coming there because they know your code. So you're going to need a password to lock it at certain times. So the password would kind of be like the key to get into your house. So if this was what our standard pod looked like, plus a whole bunch of wires and random science stuff, because that's what teleportation. Okay, anyway. So let's take a look at this. It's pretty standard, and honestly, it almost seems doable, right? Except for the fact that when you're traveling from point A to point B, it takes everything with it. So if this is cell pod A, this box is cell pod A, and this box is cell pod B, sending and receiving. Let's say they're both the same size, even though they're not, right? They're scale. So they're both scale. They're both the same size. So this one has you. Beautiful drawings, plus all the air, gases. Say a toot while you're at it. Everything. This one is just filled with air. Correct. Now, what would have to happen is that when you teleport from point A to point B, this air inside the pod over here comes with you. So then this would have twice the amount of air plus a human body. And the kind of pressure from that air after a lot of teleportation or just after that one can seriously cause your body damage, which is why in order for you to travel through it frequently enough to not harm you, you would have to have vacuum sealed. So the receiving pod has you and air, and the other pod gets vacuumed out before receiving, so it has nothing. And then when you transfer, it's the same amount of things into you. And then this pod obviously has nothing in it now because everything in it was transported. Right? Does that make sense? Oh, it looks like a smiley face, see? Okay. So if that makes enough sense, if it doesn't, all I'm saying is that in this pod, there's 2 balls. That fills up the pod. In this pod, there's also 2 balls, right? When you transport them, right, now there's 4 balls. That's too much for the pod to hold. So before you come to the pod, before you transfer 2 balls to the other one, you have to take the 2 balls out before you transfer so that there's the right amount of stuff. More simplified, you can only have 2. I don't know. That was my best off the top of my head thinking how to explain it. To those who might not understand, not calling you dumb, I'm calling you me. I had to have this explained multiple times to me before I actually understood it, and now I'm like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about just the way our entire city would be shaped. Like, if you look at a standard city block, there's your block, there's a sidewalk around it, there's a bunch of houses, correct? And around it is a street. Streets are generally pretty wide. They're a lot wider than sidewalks, right? They take up a generous amount of room. In the long term, I mean, all the parking and structures, I mean, there's so many parking buildings, especially if you go somewhere like Disneyland or something, right? There's just so much. So all of this is street. And all of that would be gone. We would have so much more room for forest. All this where the street is could be trees or bushes or grass. And that would give so much more habitat for animals. I live in Vista, California, and they're doing a lot of new developing there. So all of the coyotes that were living in these wide open fields are coming into the neighborhood. So they wouldn't have to do that if we didn't have roads. We would have so much more space. There are so many square acres of road, just open road. And just the way everything is shaped would be different. Like, people across the world are practically your neighbors because you could be there in a second. You could be anywhere you want. This would make traveling so much more easier. All those things that use fuel, like cars or airplanes, looks like a bird, airplanes or buses, all of these things, we wouldn't need them anymore because we'd be able to teleport. Trains, anything we use for transportation now would be unnecessary, and especially all the fuels. That would make, like, global warming, all of that stuff, that would be like so much less a problem if we weren't burning so many jet fuels and fossil fuels that we are now. So that is one way that it would really help reshape our world. And okay, so like stores have a lot of parking. We already talked about how we could reutilize that. So the pods, we would probably want them inside of a store. Say this was a bird's eye view. So if this were a store, you wouldn't need an entrance. And how it would work so that people couldn't come in all hours, either they could be 24 hours, that could totally be doable, or you could lock a pod. There would be so many systems and stuff that you could just literally lock it. Just like press a button and it would be off the grid. So maybe there would be a room in back, which is kind of the entrance, because there'd be a pod in there. I don't know. Then right next to it, the bathroom or something. And the counter would be here. A little, like, door would come through here. Like a hallway. This drawing's getting all messed up. Anyway, stuff, counter here. Hallway through here, pods here. It's kind of like this is your entrance now, you know? My point here is it could just affect our layout of stores and malls and all of those types of things. And also the layout of our houses. The same way you could probably lock a pod, or there would be some way to set a password. This is my assumption based on like, hey, people are smart. We're going to come up with a way to do this. So just like in a house, it would probably be, you would set like a code or something like 1136, or probably something a little safer, you know, since it's like your home. You wouldn't want 123456 as your password, obviously, or hopefully, obviously. So another question would we still have front doors? I mean, obviously people want to go on walks, but like, do we need a front door now? I mean, people just kind of come in through the pod, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So our homes would be so much like, I guess they'd be kind of safer because you wouldn't have a key. It would just be like a password. You could change your password like instantaneously. So imagine like how changing locks. When you change a lock to your house, you have to go to the store, buy it, install it, copy the key for your kid and your best friend and your mom, you know? If you were to do this, all you would have to do is go and like set a new code through an app on your phone or however it worked in these days. Trains and like bus stations, we wouldn't really have those anymore. They would probably be public pods, you know, so they're just like out there on the street. They would probably have like a pod on every block or so on the road so that people could like, you know, just like have public transportation. It probably wouldn't be a station, you know, because that would be really inconvenient. It would probably just be like a pod every block, kind of like how bus stops are. And we wouldn't need our railways or any of that things anymore. That would just, again, be non-existent, and we had so much easier way of transportation. For like more remote places that aren't suburbs or just are plain mountain ranges or deserts or rainforests, they would most likely be organized on a grid system where a 3D grid would be placed over it before the pods were placed, and it would all be gridded out, mapped like this. The space in between here would probably be, I'm guessing maybe 10 miles, because we'd have so many thousands of miles to cover. And maybe 20, I'm going to say, because budgets, you know? And there would be a pod placed on every 20 miles in a grid. And that would make it, I mean, so many less people would die in the middle of the desert or on Mount Everest because they would just have to get to the next pod. So that would Lost in the Jungle wouldn't be lost anymore. You just kind of wander. I mean, the farthest you'd ever be from a pod was 10 miles at the farthest. And I'm pretty sure I could walk 10 miles if I really tried. I mean, I'd probably die afterwards, but I could probably walk 10 miles. So, the ethics of this, really. So, when you're traveling from point A, pretend this is a pod, to point B, that's a 2. It's a B, okay. B, from point A to point B, what's happening is your cells are like disintegrating or vaporizing and immediately reappearing in another spot, which is partly why it's so unrealistic, because there's no scientific way to make that happen. And is the person who comes out on the other side, is it really you? Is it really you? Because this is you over here. But do your memories go with you? Like, is this person on the other side, would it actually end up being you? Like, who is that person going to be? Will your memories go with you? It's not an easy question to answer. So will every time we teleport just make another clone of a person? I mean, it would be so much more convenient if it wasn't, but it honestly makes sense why this would happen. Another and last thing is, what is it going to take to power these? In these far-off futuristic systems, we're not going to need any more fossil fuels to burn up our atmosphere and holes in our ozone. We're not going to need that. So we'd obviously have using electricity, and it would be, depending on where you were and what was most convenient, solar power or wind power. That would probably be what we used the most. So thank you so much for listening to me. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at corrinesta@gmail.com. There's my email right there. I spelled it wrong. Don't go to that email. Okay, there we go. corrinesta@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope I have made you ponder. Tune in for the next episode of What If by me.